Hello and welcome to the channel. Today what we're going to talk about is the role of generative AI in integration. Let's go. So before I get started here, I just want to put out a bit of a disclaimer. So the ideas that I'm going to talk about here represent my own thoughts and they're not a commitment that these ideas will be productized. So some of them might be, some of them may not, but don't look at this as any sort of forward guiding statement. I really wanted to create this video to generate some discussion around the topic and actually get other people's perspectives on where they see AI and the intersection of it and integration or automation. So that's very much the purpose of this presentation. The other thing is, we're all learning at this point. Like, no one has all the answers. Like, even Sam Altman doesn't have all the answers at this point in time. So, some of this naturally is speculative, but that's kind of the opportunity, is to learn from each other as we go through this. Now, one thing, that comes up a fair bit when we think about AI is automation and, the role of automation. And I like to think of integration as a form of automation, or you could think of automation as a form of integration. And oftentimes we do use these words interchangeably. And I think rightfully so. Like, the goal of automation is to remove manual interactions. I think if we think about integration, even historically, we've got different systems talking to each other, sending messages back and forth. And ultimately, like, the role there is avoiding manual interactions. And, otherwise, what would the solution be? The solution is hands on a keyboard, swivel chairing between different applications, putting data into them. And naturally, that is why I do feel this relationship between automation and integration. And one thing when we think about, okay, what does the future mean when we think about AI and integration or automation, is, removing more and more of those manual interactions. Now, something that does occur today when we think about integration is everything is very deterministic. And I think this is probably where things get a little bit even uncertain for me, is how far we will be able to go knowing the deterministic nature of integration. So what do I mean by deterministic? So if you think about today, when you're building a solution, you need things like schemas and maps, and you've got business rules or logic, and you've got routing rules. You do things in a very deliberate manner, and you typically do that in a non-prod environment. And you do this validation, and you validate everything works, and you design or you code the solution so that it can account for different logic or paths that a message might take. And the idea is it's very repeatable, and once it's repeatable and stable, then you can go ahead and deploy that to production and expect a similar outcome from that perspective. And so that's where things, I think, are going to get pretty interesting with integration because of that deterministic nature. If you think about today, when we talk about like large language models, naturally things are not very deterministic, or not as deterministic as we might want them to be. And I think that's where things will get interesting as we sort of move through this topic. But one thing is for sure, that integration sits right in the middle of generative AI use cases. And if we think about generative AI, it's generally about data. And we're needing to integrate data. We're needing to move data around and use it to drive some sort of outcome. Sometimes that's decisions. Sometimes that's acting on behalf of someone to perform a task. This is all right for integration. So as integration or automation specialists, this is a topic you should be spending time on and learning. Now, there might be some naysayers here going, okay, well, isn't generative AI the next hype or bubble? And I would say without question, there's a lot of hype right now, but I don't think this is blockchain. A few years back, everyone was excited about blockchain, and it never really lived up to its billing. And, I know there's still a lot of blockchain companies out there, and maybe we will see more impact down the road. But for now, I feel like it's definitely hasn't lived up to its billing. But I think with AI, we're already starting to see like use cases in industries that are actually quite promising. And I've put some of these just on the slide here, and I'll include some links in the video description if you want to go follow up on these. But like, let's start with number one, content creation. So naturally, you've seen like the Microsoft Designer capability, likely, where you can describe a photo or an image that you would like it to create, and it'll go ahead and do that. And it's kind of been interesting. I've experienced with my daughter a fair bit. She does some sort of YouTube and sort of videos for herself, and we've used it actually to generate some images, and it's actually not bad. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Especially when you have text, it gets a little bit garbled, but it's super impressive, and so I think there's something there. One thing I did want to go ahead and call out was we've got Reid Hoffman here, and this is a worthwhile video to check out. So Reid Hoffman is a Silicon Valley titan. He's been involved in the establishment of many different like world-class tech companies. He started at PayPal. He co-founded or founded LinkedIn. I believe he's been involved in a lot of different very successful companies. And here he's got an AI version of himself. And this AI version of himself actually has an interview with Emily Chang, who's a journalist who works for Bloomberg, so a very credible organization. And just go ahead and watch it. It's pretty interesting where the AI version of himself, which is actually pictured here, is actually able to carry on a conversation with Emily Chang. After she briefly interviews the AI version of Reid, then she'll actually interview the real Reid, and they'll talk a little bit more about their experiences. So that is something that is kind of interesting. Now, interesting maybe in a bad way, but also interesting in a good way too. So there's obviously some balance from this perspective. If we think about the automotive industry, there's a lot of noise about self-driving cars and how that's the future. You think about Tesla or even the ride-sharing applications. There actually are like some cars today. I've seen them in Phoenix, Arizona, and Tempe. Waymo is a company that is actually driving people around without a human driver. And so this is a form of AI, and this is absolutely real. Once again, is it perfect? No. But is it trending in the right direction? Absolutely. Cybersecurity is another example for good and for bad, right? There's clearly some bad actors that are using AI to try to, break into systems, defraud people, etc. On the flip side, there's the good people that are trying to protect us using AI as well. Anomaly and fraud detection, naturally, this is another area. Credit card companies are using this technology. Banking institutions, financial institutions trying to figure out when you've got fraudulent transactions and being able to proactively detect those. Now, certainly healthcare is an area where radiology, image classification is being used. And this was an interesting basically video. This was on CNBC, and it was actually just this past Friday. I was watching Mad Money with Jim Cramer, and this company came up, and I thought it was kind of interesting, so I tuned in and listened to it, and share you the link here. You can watch the video of yourself, but it's a company called Recursion AI that is actually using AI to develop drugs and to be able to get through the discovery process much faster. So obviously this is an emerging technology. We'll see where it goes, but if they actually are successful here, it could have a massive impact on society as a whole, and in this case I would argue very much a positive impact. Also, we've got things around customer service. There's no question AI is emerging there. If you think about ChatGPT, a lot of that is about conversational AI. We also have document processing, which is a big part of automation as well, being able to scrape PDFs and other documents and be able to feed downstream systems with the underlying data. That's impressive as well. This is only a subset of things, but there's naturally a lot of momentum here. And I would say there's going to be some, situations where AI is not good for everyone. I do think that, unfortunately, there likely will be some job attrition in the future. I think there's no question. We'll have to see. I think thus far, whenever there has been a leap in technology, it's also resulted in more meaningful jobs. Hopefully that is the case with AI, but I guess time will tell from that front. But what I would suggest, though, is that you're much better off having AI in your tool belt than not having it. And, there is a pretty popular saying going on these days, AI may not take your job, but someone who knows AI will. I am a firm believer of that. That is something that you should be learning. You should be trying to understand this technology. And hey, I'm going through the same journey right now myself. One other thing I do want to call out is this book. If you're interested in use cases and trying to understand what the impact for better or for worse could be with AI, I would check out this book called The Coming Wave. It's from Mustafa Suleyman, who is recently joined Microsoft as the CEO of AI. He previously worked at Google. He started AI companies. He's a thought leader in this space. And, there you can see he's the co-founder of DeepMind and Inflection AI. Google had bought DeepMind, several years ago, and he was working over at Google as well. So I think he takes a very sort of practical look at the impacts of AI for good or for worse. But I think it's also eye-opening in terms of like learning more about how AI can be applied. So do check that book out. I've just recently finished it, and it's a great read. Now, the other thing just around AI and why I think you should, spend some time looking at this is recently Microsoft and LinkedIn put out the 2024 Work Trend Index, and you can start to see, the impact of AI in organizations. Here, employees want to use AI at work, and they don't want to wait for companies to catch up. And here you can see that of the people surveyed, 78% of AI users are bringing their own tools to work. And so that's one of those things where reminds me a little bit of the Power Platform in Shadow IT, where it's one of those things as a organization, you're better off like bringing in sanctioned tools that help your users. That's a far better solution than Shadow IT, where now people are using your data in third-party tools that you have no control over. So, obviously there's demand for AI tools. Next, this is more from a manager perspective, hiring leaders. Here you can see 66% wouldn't hire someone without any AI skills. So naturally, that's a pretty clear signal that down the road, if you are looking for a new opportunity, there's a high probability that AI is going to be a prerequisite. And then here's another, just the impact, right? So if we think about automation, once again, going back to, improving productivity, here, there's a metric around saving 30 minutes per day. And you might argue, okay, great, that's only 30 minutes. What did that person do with that 30 minutes? Did they have a longer lunch break? Did they have a longer coffee break? But now multiply that basically per week, per month, per year, per business unit, per organization, per company. That can start to stack up quite quickly from that perspective. So if you are getting some benefits from AI, it can have a very profound impact on your business. All right, so that's a little bit of some back information. Now let's talk a little bit more about integration. So if we think about what we're doing in Logic Apps, we're kind of approaching this from two angles. One is boosting developer productivity with AI capabilities. And I think this goes back a little bit to that deterministic view of AI and integration. I think the nature of integration, where you need to go ahead and build out a solution, you need to be able to test that solution, you need that solution to operate and execute very consistently, that's very much in line with this. Because this allows a human to be in the loop. This allows for a human to validate what the AI has done. Then let's think about building intelligent apps. And this is more about, hey, we're going to talk about the RAG pattern here shortly. There's a lot of tools that you can use to build these applications. Why can't you do that with low code, a low code offering? And really that's kind of our angle, where we can provide you with connectors that help you build these applications. And it's no different than building an application or integrating some systems using an iPaaS. We want to lower that barrier of entry. It's no different than that. So let's talk a little bit about developer productivity opportunities. And once again, these are more theoretical. Don't assume anything from a roadmap perspective. I do feel that there's a lot of immediate benefits by being able to use AI in this space. So whether that's the generation of workflows, schemas, maps, or even sample data, I think that is all good opportunities. We've started to see, some areas where you can try to author a workflow and maybe even edit a workflow, or say, build me this schema, or, here's some sample data, define a map for me, or like, hey, I need to now test this trigger, go create some sample data. These are all things that will save a developer, minutes to maybe even hours, and once again allows you to focus on the core problem that you're trying to solve. Another situation is custom code, right? So we've got custom code available in Logic Apps today where you can go ahead and author essentially an Azure function. So certainly we've got things like Copilot Studio where you can ask it to write some code for you, review your code, optimize your code, describe your code. Those are all opportunities to leverage AI to improve productivity. Knowledge, this is something that we do provide today. You can ask, what does this workflow do? How does this work? Or how can I improve this workflow? Or how do I go ahead and add this connector to the mix and get some responses? Once again, it's a Copilot. There's a reason why it's called Copilot, is that there's someone there to sort of help you achieve a task. And I think those are other things, especially if you're earlier on in your career, that guidance or that mentor is actually quite huge. So I think this is a great opportunity to provide this as an offering as well. Now next is operations, and this I think is interesting too. So naturally you've got a lot of messages going back and forth. You might have lots of workflows and components in the mix that are all trying to participate in a solution. And the question is, now you start to get some errors and you're not quite sure why. Now, wouldn't it be great to be able to say, hey, try to figure out why this is failing, and having the AI be able to go ahead and identify those issues and perhaps maybe even remediate it for you. This is more of an emerging area, but that is something that I think would be useful. The other thing that could be interesting too is insights. And we've done a little bit of this through business process tracking, but it's very deterministic, back to that term. What if there was the ability to kind of query across your business data and be able to gain some insights? Because today it's very transactional, but what if you could go ahead and learn through the different transactions that are moving through your system itself? That could be pretty interesting as well. And so just to kind of summarize this slide a little bit, for decades, I think you've probably all heard this, integration has this perceived label that it's complicated, it's expensive, and there's typically a niche or small labor pool that can go ahead and build these solutions. And so I see all of these capabilities as democratization. Now, as an independent consultant, you might not like that term because that could have an impact on the ability to charge higher rates. But I think at the end of the day, if we think about organizations being able to do more with less, which is naturally, a term you're going to hear a lot, AI becomes an equalizer from that perspective. I think the other thing is that the common thread with these different opportunities I talked about is that there still is a human that is in the loop here. There is a human that's going to validate the suggestions or the output before it actually gets implemented. And I think that's another, step in the journey, because, naturally there's going to be some skepticism. Generative AI will hallucinate. That's kind of a feature, not a bug. And I think there is this need for humans to be part of that process. Now, what does that look like 10 years from now? Who knows? Your guess is as good as mine, but certainly in the immediate future, there's definitely a place where a human's going to be part of the solution. And that's why I feel like leveraging AI to go ahead and accomplish these things sets you apart from someone that doesn't want to use these technologies. So these are just some of the current examples that we do have today in our workflow assistant inside of Logic Apps. This is in the Azure portal. You can ask it to describe a workflow, recommend connectors to send to do a specific action. In this case, it's email. Testing, provide me a sample payload to test this workflow. It'll go inspect the trigger, understand what that looks like. And then also just guidance. Hey, how do I go ahead and implement a particular pattern? So these are things that you can do today, and I fully expect in the future we'll have even more capabilities here. Now, let's flip gears a little bit to the second part of the presentation. So we talked about developer productivity. Now we're going to talk more about developing these generative AI applications. So a big challenge is with generative AI is its non-deterministic nature. So consider a situation where maybe you've got dynamic mapping and you basically instruct as part of a workflow to say, whenever you receive this type of message, go ahead and transform it into this other message. And you give it some instructions, first name, last name, order, address, etc. Now, with hallucinations, there is a probability that you're not always going to get the same result. And I think this is by design. There's variability in responses, and there's something called temperature that is a setting that allows you to basically control the amount of creativity in that response. And so this is a situation where I'm not sure we're ready for this just yet. Because imagine you have an order that comes in and a key field isn't mapped. Like maybe the purchase price or a discount price or the customer name or the customer ID. So that becomes, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of support for those types of things missing. But I think you can mitigate some of those risks by introducing a human in the loop. And maybe that dynamic data mapping isn't the greatest example here, but certainly when you do have generative AI and the AI application is about to do something on behalf of a user, introducing a human in the loop, like approval, basically gives you more governance and allows you essentially to override the behavior. So this is as simple as using a Teams message, the Teams connector, and an adaptive card that says, hey, I'm about to go do this based upon this information that I received. Is this a reasonable expectation? And then you can go ahead and click the approve or the go button and it'll go do this. And we see this a fair bit in robotic process automation, especially as companies basically go ahead and adopt that technology where now the automation is doing the work that a human would typically do. And it is dependent upon the screen and where things might be laid out on a screen. And so sometimes you do that today. So I don't think that is anything different when we talk about these type of applications. Now, the other thing here, and these are just more some observations, and I think this is kind of impressive in some ways. I've spent a couple years working in the PowerCat team before joining the Logic Apps team on Power Virtual Agents. And it was kind of interesting building chatbots at that time versus building chatbots today. And this just speaks to the impact of large language models, LLMs, because historically, what you would have to do is you would build a chatbot and you would create these different topics. It was basically a chat-based workflow. It's I'm interested in store hours. So you would go ahead and basically configure, I won't say code, but you would configure what do you want that conversation to be like, for that particular scenario. So for each of these topics, you would typically go ahead and have some sort of conversational workflow. Now, back then, you could kind of automate this a little bit by being able to ingest an FAQ document, and it would basically automatically build all of these conversations out. Now, the problem with that was that when you did it, it was all hard-coded, basically. Everything was scripted. And so if you had changes, you needed to then go ahead and basically reconfigure, reload everything. And so what's changed with these LLMs now is the ability to go take your corporate data, and there could be large amounts of this corporate data, and upload it to an LLM, and then let your chatbot essentially query more freely on those particular topics. So instead of you having to pre-code everything, now that it's more loosely coupled, if you will, and you're basically able to go ahead and query your backend based upon a large data set itself. And I think this was one of the earlier frustrations customers had, was that they could build a chatbot quite easily, but maintaining it was very difficult because you always had to manage that static content, where I think now you can really have your source of truth and be able to build on top of that. Now, the other thing that happened with these FAQ bots was that they would quickly run out of, I would call it ROI, because you could always get some people to ask your chatbot a question, but then the chatbot would just tell them what they had to go do. So all you're doing is kind of assigning more work to the end user, right? Like they had to come to your chatbot, they asked you a bunch of questions, then you told them how do you go solve their problem. And so I think what we would always propose is like being able to automate that last mile, and whatever that customer is trying to achieve, how do you go ahead and do it on their behalf? And I think that is where these integration platforms and automation platforms fit in. And I think that's really the opportunity. So when you start to hear about plugins, that's where you can start to think of like, after the chatbot or the LLM has figured out what's to do, what needs to happen, what's the next step, then you can tap on the shoulders of your integration platform to say, now go do it. And our large library of connectors gives you that opportunity to do that last mile of automation itself. I think there's that piece, and I think the other interesting piece, that I find particularly interesting is this notion of event-driven applications. So if you think about logic apps today, we've got workflows, we've got triggers. Those triggers can listen for different events that take place in different systems. Well, this also provides the opportunity to go ahead and listen for those events, then go query an LLM, and then go ahead and automate the last mile. So, this might be a situation with, say, security. And we see some of this today, even, with the integration that we do have with, Microsoft's security platforms itself. But, this idea of run books where you can go ahead, listen for an event, then maybe you go ahead and query your large language model for like, how do you go resolve this? Then once you know how you resolve it, now how do you go automate that last mile with the connectors? Customer service might be another one, right? You've got maybe an email box, or you've got a request that comes into your ITSM service or your CRM. And now you've got a workflow that's listening basically for those events to come in. Go query the large language model. Oh, okay, I need to be added to this group. Now go ahead and add a person to a group. Or I need to order something. Now go order something. So I think those are scenarios that I get particularly interested in, where you can take advantage of our connectors, an LLM, and then our connectors to go ahead and drive some particular outcome. And so this is typically known as the RAG pattern, so the Retrieval Augmented Generation pattern. This is something that is not like a Microsoft specific thing, more of an industry thing. But this is how you can go ahead and build these types of applications. And there's typically kind of the two paths for them. One is the ingestion, right? So you take your corporate data, you then tokenize, and I'll show a demo of this here shortly. You tokenize the documents, you generate the embeddings using the Azure OpenAI connector, and then you go ahead and index and store those vectors using Azure AI Search. So that's basically onboarding your documentation, your corporate data, into your own private Azure OpenAI service. Then you've got more of the runtime capabilities where you need to be able to go ahead and search on that data itself. So you provide a prompt. This is what I'm looking for. Then you can go ahead and generate the embedding using Azure OpenAI. You go ahead and perform the vector DB search, and then you basically have the related segments and prompt, and you return it back to the end user itself. And so these are kind of the two modes. And so this is something that we provide to you through the connectors. They're currently in public preview, but I do expect them to GA shortly, where you can go ahead and build out these applications using Azure Logic Apps. Now, it's not to say this is the only way to do it. That's couldn't be further from the truth. But speaking back to like our whole goals around low-code productivity, this is what we're trying to solve. Here's the Azure Samples GitHub repo. You can see all of these different scripts that are here that you could use to go ahead and solve the same problem. But what we've done is through the use of low-code and connectors, we can actually simplify how you go ahead and get this done. And so that's really the goal of what we're trying to do, is bring that low-code approach to these types of solutions, and choose whichever approach is more appropriate for you. It's not wrong or right. So I'm going to show you a brief demo here. I want to share some other resources. I'm not going to go super deep. This video is already quite long, but Parth Shah, he had gone ahead and built a blog post, so I will drop that in the description. And then also we've got Brian Bennett, engineer on our team, and he's gone ahead and created the sample. It's in GitHub. Here's the link. I'll put the link in the description of the video. This will allow you to go ahead and replicate what I'm going to show you quite quickly on your side. Okay, so we're going to start off with our ingestion workflow. And what we're going to do here is we're going to ingest this document. So this is fictional company Contoso, and we've got the plan and benefits packages. And so this is a PDF that we're going to ingest into our LLM. Now, obviously you can have larger documents, more documents, etc., but this is, just for demo purposes. And this is a document that's part of the GitHub package itself. So if you go ahead and run this, you'll have access to this document as well. Now, we're going to just get a request in, and as part of that request, we're going to get the document name and the document URL, basically the document I just showed you. We're then going to go ahead and pick that up. We're going to retrieve it from GitHub essentially. And then we're just going to do some compose. We're going to take that document, add some metadata around that, and then what we're going to go ahead and do is send this to an Azure function. So there is an Azure function that's part of that GitHub repo. It's basically some Python code that you'll go ahead and use to provision an Azure function to basically go ahead and tokenize the document. Then we'll just do some manipulation here with the data and filter it out, and then go ahead and send this off to the Azure OpenAI service to get the embeddings. And then we'll go ahead and do some selection on top of it, and then basically pass that to the Azure AI search to basically go ahead and index those documents. So let's go ahead and we can just run this. And what I'll do here is I'm just going to resubmit, just because I don't want to copy and paste that inbound payload. But we'll go ahead and take a look at the outputs here. So we see that this has been successfully executed. You can see here the URL of the document in GitHub itself. And then we're going to go ahead and go through and load that document into our LLM. Now, the next piece of this is going to now query. So this could be an experience that we expose that allows someone to pass in a prompt or an utterance that allows us to go ahead and query the LLM. Now, what we do here is we just have a very simple string being exposed where we basically capture the prompt. Now, this is where we provide some data, some instructions to the LLM. So we're basically describing the scenario for it. So we're instructing the LLM that it is an intelligent assistant helping Contoso employees with their healthcare plans and questions, and gives it some ground rules too about what data can be used from that perspective. Then we're giving some sample responses as well. And then, some additional instructions that the LLM will go ahead and use when it performs the query. So we do have some inline JavaScript here just to help us formulate the query that we're going to then pass into the Azure OpenAI service. And then we're going to get some embeddings for the Azure OpenAI service. We're then going to use Azure AI Search to search the vector database. We're going to then create a prompt and then get some chat completions and then basically return that back to the caller. Now, I do have Postman here that we will use to go ahead and ask some questions. So here I've got Postman, and I'm going to ask which of the plans includes mental health coverage. So we'll go ahead and call that. And we can see here that the plan that includes mental health coverage is Northwind Health Plus. Now, if we flip back to our document here, we can see the two major descriptions, and we can see that mental health is covered as part of Northwind Health Plus, and it's not actually part of the standard package. So once again, there was no logic. Back to that whole deterministic thing, there was no logic that I provided around mental health, right? Like there was no sort of use case, there was no sort of a topic that was used to drive down that particular path itself. This was just found by querying the LLM. So let's flip back over to Postman and look at another scenario. So now we can provide a prompt of what about prescription drugs? And then we can see that both plans offer coverage for prescription drugs. Now what this is it's referencing the document. So this is naturally an important consideration when building these LLM applications, is you want to be able to reference where the information came from. Now, in this case, we had a single document, so this may not be as interesting, but imagine you have multiple documents that are ingested into your LLM application, and you want to know like where the answer was, derived from. Now, you can also see that, the Plus does a wider range of prescription drug coverage versus the Northwind Health Plus, but the standard has just covers generic and some brand name drugs. So it is even able to differentiate between the two packages, even though they both offer some level of prescription drugs. So that's the demo. I'm gonna sort of leave it there, but hopefully this has been a useful video for you. Would love to hear in the comments about where you see AI headed with integration. And, I would encourage you to go ahead and check out the sample in GitHub. It shouldn't take you too long to get that rolling. And you can go ahead and try out this capability for yourself. Thanks again, and we'll catch you later.